Hi, everybody. We're just letting participants in now. Welcome to the Business Renewables Centre Australia's webinar on PPA Market Outlook 2025 and energy storage. This is part of our Buying Power webinar series. So we hope you've grabbed some lunch and have the time to sit down and understand a little bit more about what the experts are saying about what's coming up this year, some of the challenges and opportunities that we'll be seeing. We've got a fantastic panel here today, but I'll introduce them very shortly. So today we will get started with a quick summary of various events and some of the work that we're doing here at BRC-A. If you've got any questions about any of it, just give us a shout and we can give you a little bit more information. There's also lots of info at our website on all of those. Today, we're also launching our State of the Market report, State of PPA Market report, that is, for 2024. And the full version of that will be up on our website later today. So you can download that and have a look. It's a very interesting piece this year, as last year was, as every year, a unique year in the PPA market. So we're going to kick off with a presentation from BRC-A's Technical Director, Chris Briggs, who'll share some of the outcomes from that report. Then I'll introduce our four fantastic panelists for today, and we'll be spending the majority of that time chatting to and listening to them. Today's session will be recorded for the benefit of those who are unable to attend, and it will form part of our Industry Knowledge Bank, which is located on our website under Training and Events. So if you want to see the recording, if you miss any of it, please jump on there. We'll also have time for some questions towards the end of the session, I hope. Otherwise, if we don't, feel free to shoot questions through to us afterwards, and we might be able to address them following as well. So just before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet today, and the many lands we're all based on. And for us here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Just a note also, if you do have questions or anything today, just pop them into the Q&A. The chat will be disabled. In case you're new to Business Renewables Centre Australia, we are a for-purpose, not-for-profit organisation. We've been around since 2018, and we provide independent connection, resources and training for organisations in the PPA space and renewable energy purchasing space. We have a whole bunch of resources on our website, in addition to the training that we provide, including consultants lists, templates, guides, market information, policy information. So if you're interested in any of that, please do reach out and learn more. So what are we doing in 2025? This list will evolve as the year goes on, but a brief snapshot of where we're at now. We are about to deliver our first PPA bootcamp for energy buyers for 2025. That's going to be on the 26th and 27th of March in Newcastle, and that's going to be a fantastic event. Obviously only for energy buyers, but for large and medium energy buyers in particular. All of the details are on our website for that event, but again, get in touch if you want to know more. We'll also be delivering a buyers bootcamp in Queensland in May, which is exciting. We haven't delivered one. It will in Queensland before. It will be in Brisbane, and it will also be partially online for remote organisations across Queensland. And we're doing this as part of the piece of work that we've been doing for the Queensland State Government. And as part of that project, we also are running a webinar next week on the 11th of March for regional organisations of councils in Queensland, and alliances of councils, etc., and councils themselves. We have Peter Vun from Ku-ring-gai Council, who'll be talking about the SS Rock PPA that was done a couple of years ago, the challenges and the benefits of those sorts of buying models. We've obviously got also our usual buying power webinars about every 6 to 8 weeks that we'll be delivering throughout the year. We are also delivering our buyers group program. This is still open to participants. You can register your interest if you're a buyer at that email address there. And we are currently seeking funding for phase 2. I mentioned before that we've got the guide launching today, the State of the Market report launching today. We've got a whole bunch of other guides we've already launched. And we've also got our market advisory panel. So if you're a member and you'd like to attend that session, that's next Wednesday on the 12th. So I'll just skip through there now, Bridget, and we'll actually hand over now to Chris, just keeping an eye on the time, to start his presentation now on the state of the market. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jackie. So I guess regular viewers will know that we produce annually a state of the market report and have been doing so for 6 years. It's based on an industry survey of buyers, service providers, retailers, developers, our own database, and a variety of different types of stakeholder input, in particular our market advisory panel. Next slide. So the key headlines out of this year's report is that last year was another record year in terms of volume, but it was primarily the product of a handful of very large PPAs. As with the year before, there was an element of stasis in the market. Buyer demand continued to exceed available supply, but some buyers without 2025 targets in front of them appear to have a bit more time to wait for the market and pricing to improve, and were holding off. Some of the key features of last year's markets were Queensland again standing out as a leading state, the disappearance of mid-sized deals and buyers, and the growth in buyers retiring LGCs. Some of the key drivers as we look ahead is the consistency and sustainability targets as the catalyst for interest across the ups and downs of prices. The upturn in supply and large tenders in the capacity investment scheme emerging later in the year, which are going to help rebalance supply and demand. And the very large growth in utility scale batteries and what that means for PPA, which will be a key part of what we talk about today. Next slide. One thing we did do this year was to look back across 2017 and to see what the impact of PPAs or the role of PPAs has been over the last 8 years. What we found is that PPAs have contracted for almost 1 in 5 of the capacity with doing deals with new projects. As they're often partial deals that only cover some of the projects, these deals have supported almost 30% of the contracted capacity since 2017. When we extend that to looking at PPAs negotiated through commissioning phase and operation phase, then PPAs have directly negotiated about 40% of the capacity. And again, these are partial. And so if you consider the scale of all the projects, then it's 70% of contracted capacity has been supported by a corporate PPA. So, to put that another way, only 30% of the capacity since 2017 hasn't had a corporate PPA involved at some stage, which really speaks to the importance of PPAs in the market. Next slide. So this is the overall deal volumes. You can see, again, a very clear record year with around 33,400 megawatts, headlined by 2 mega deals by Rio Tinto and a handful of other larger PPAs. Next slide. And you can really see the impact here in the quarterly volumes with that enormous big bang to start the year. Then with volumes the rest of the year really pretty similar to recent years. We normally cover things like wholesale PPAs versus retail PPAs and the share of new versus operating, but the scale of those PPAs means those numbers are kind of blown out of the water. It was a good year for wholesale and new PPAs because of those handful of very large PPAs. Next slide. So looking at market dynamics then, I think as most people will know, there's been a stagnation in the project pipeline, and that carried through most of the year. So we saw buyers that had already contracted for 2025 targets and were holding off. But as I think we'll hear, 2030 targets will mean that buyers will need to re-enter the market pretty soon. And the good news is that there's a lot of supply coming. It's a busy graph on the left from the Clean Energy Council, but if you focus on the orange line, it's showing you how much financially committed renewables projects there are by quarter. IEMO says we need to hit 1,500 megawatts a quarter to reach the target. You can see we haven't really done that except for one quarter in years. But quarter three last year, it was getting up to 1,500. I'm pretty sure quarter four was going to go over that. And the Australian Energy Regulator is projecting 5 gigawatts to come online to actually be commissioned in the next year. So supply is on the way. One of the things I guess we've been considering is how the capacity investment scheme impacts on corporate PPAs. And there's 3 different scenarios, and I think elements of each of them are in play. There's an element of crowding out as projects and big retailers are going to focus on the CIS. However, the criteria have included reward or incentives for projects that include PPAs, and some have noted that PPAs are getting incorporated in a way that helps bid teams sharpen their terms and tenure. We've also heard, I guess, some buyers wanting to be involved at this stage for additionality reasons as well before the auctions. And then thirdly, I think, and probably most commonly, we're going to see a growth in retail PPAs on the other side of financial closure once there's some de-risking. And we've also heard, I guess, some anecdotally that we're seeing some PPAs of shorter tenure that are able to be secured once a project has a CIS tender. The other thing I think to note is that we've seen last year, and I think we'll continue to see this, is large industrials settling PPAs outside the capacity investment scheme, and that becoming like a market segment in its own. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we see in our survey incredible consistency really from year to year in what buyers say are the primary or the initial driver for them, and it's targets, CSR, and reputation around 2/3. Which I think gives you an indication of the durability of demand because it just rides across the ups and downs of the market that we've seen. Next slide. We heard a couple of years ago that buyers were selling or selling LGCs and then retiring them at a later date to meet targets. So we've started tracking that through surveys. You can see, I think, if you look from the blue to the purple, much higher numbers starting to retire, of course, as you get closer to their target dates, and the prices are not as high and the attraction of selling is not as high. So that might have been a passing trend, but we will see. Next slide. One of the things that has been notable about the Australian market is the diversity of buyers. So we track the scale of deals. Each segment here is from less than 20 megawatts on the left up to the red 100 plus megawatts. And you can see most years there's a nice mix of different colors there. But 2024, essentially it was large and small buyers alone with virtually no mid-scale buyers. Next slide. And that's even more pronounced when you look at the capacity. So this is the percentage of capacity overall negotiated by different market segments. Normally the red, the super large, around 50% of the market. And this year they were 95% plus. And very little in the medium or small scale. Next slide. We also survey buyers around their experience of PPAs. If you look at the graph on the right, there's 5 years of data on asking people how to rate how hard it was to do a PPA from 1 easy through to 5 difficult. No one in the history of the survey has said it was easy to put a 1 against it. Virtually no one's ever put a 2 against it. But over time, there's definitely been a noticeable decrease in the people putting a 5 and an increase in the people putting a 3. I think this year was a little bit of an outlier because if you look at the graph on the left, the big red tower there, you can see there was a lot of people that did 6 to 12-month PPAs in the survey, so they're probably by nature a bit easier. But nonetheless, I think there's a sort of clear trend that they've been getting a bit easier. They're not as hard as they have been. Next slide. So I think, as everyone probably here knows as well, there's this incredible surge of utility scale battery storage going on. I read a post on LinkedIn yesterday saying that there are 6 projects being commissioned and 33 in construction, which is quite extraordinary. So we've also started surveying service providers and developers about whether PPAs include firming of different types. And the answer is from last year to the year before, a bit more, but still not that common. I think we're on the cusp now where business models for battery storage and products are being developed and it's about to emerge, but it's still not quite there in terms of a mainstream phenomenon in PPAs. But that's what we're going to hear from our expert panel more about now. So I'll hand back to Jackie.
Fantastic, Chris, and well done squeezing that into 10 minutes. Obviously, there are a whole bunch more themes in the report, so we strongly recommend you download that and take a look at it. Some very interesting pieces in there. So now to the main part of today's webinar, our panel session. And to kick it off, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists in no particular order, but starting with our energy buyer, Jared Parker. You might want to wave or whatever. Jared is National Services Manager at QIC Real Estate. And as shopping centre professional and commercial manager, Jared oversees electricity purchasing and manages multiple income streams to ensure optimal operational efficiency and profitability. So no pressure there, Jared. We also have Angela Riley. Many of you will know Angela. Angela is Head of Sales for Southeastern Australia at Smartest Energy. Angela has over 20 years experience working across Australia's wholesale and retail energy markets and leads Smartest Energy's retail team, delivering retail solutions, energy solutions for business and supporting customers to achieve their renewable energy and no doubt sustainability objectives. We also have Chung Kyu Ang, Principal Consultant at Core Markets. I'm going to call you CK because you've said to me you're happy with that, CK, so thank you very much. CK, as I mentioned, is a specialist consultant helping to facilitate the transition towards a sustainable net zero future. Previously, CK held positions as renewable energy researcher with projects in multiple solar cell technologies, hydrogen water splitting, and liquid hydrogen storage. And then our fourth panelist today, our developer, we have David Stavridis. David is commercial manager at Excelio and has over 14 years experience in the energy sector. He manages various commercial related activities across Excelio APAC and is predominantly based around the origination of commercial arrangements to help deploy the company's large-scale solar and energy pipelines. So welcome to all of you. So I'm going to launch into the questions. We'll talk first of all about the, I guess, the market review and the market outlook. And I'll ask my first question to CK. I guess overall and starting high level, which of the SOM sort of, I guess, market report findings resonate with your experience of the current PPA market?
Hey, Jackie. Yeah, thanks for the question, for having me for today's panel. So I think the state of the market report's quite a accurate reflection on what we've experienced here at Core Markets. So there was certainly a lot less buying interest for mid-sized corporates in the PPA space compared to the years previously, as most of the corporates that had, I guess, primarily driven to pursue renewable PPAs for their sustainability goals would have done that 2023, 2024 latest. So there was a lot of the, I guess, 2025 milestone targets would have been primarily driving those corporates. And then I suppose last year, the absence of mid-sized buyers likely is from having those that moved early had already done so. And now the delayed in pursuing renewable PPAs for a combination of reasons. One is primarily price, both in terms of LGCs hitting their near-time highs, as well as just overall black energy on the rise as well, has meant that some have delayed their 25 targets to maybe 2026 or later on prior to 2030. So that's quite consistent. And there's also been, I guess, 2024, we had a much more central focus on batteries, actually, as opposed to PPAs. So a lot of battery inquiries, both on buy and sell side in different battery products, as this likely is driven from just the amount of new battery storage coming online, different ways that you can monetize batteries and how that also fits into different businesses, I guess, sustainability, I guess, net zero plans, as they've kind of go down this list of, looking into renewable PPAs, looking at behind the meter solar. And I guess a lot of corporates are looking at this stage of, okay, what do we do with batteries? How does that fit into our existing strategy? Or how can we find a way to incorporate this to optimize our existing assets as well?
Yeah, great. And I think we'll come back to a little bit more on that energy storage piece and what the customers are looking at around there. So are you seeing corporate energy buyers holding off on renewable energy purchases to fill 2030 obligations until we get to a little bit closer to that gate? And is that a smart or a risky sort of strategy in the current market?
Yeah, so I'll unpack that a little bit more. So I think in terms of the PPA space, there's kind of been an evolution of three groups. So the first group were early movers who were sustainably focused and open to the risks of a wholesale PPA. So this would be pre-2020, those wholesale PPAs. And then you had a second group were a little later who came along, also sustainably focused, but a little bit more price conscious and wanted to have more certainty in what they were getting into. So this is the group that entered into retail PPAs, where it was a more seamless transaction and less complex. So it was more accessible. And now this third group, which I suspect is kind of waiting in the wings, are still sustainably oriented, but are primarily more cost sensitive at the moment. So they likely are holding off until prices come down to a level where where it's acceptable to their business. As usual, longer term PPAs, it is a hard conversation to have if most corporates are used to having shorter term 1 to 3 year contracts. Going up to 7+ is quite a leap. So with more projects coming up through the pipeline, I think their price may be reaching a stage where this group that's kind of waiting to execute on their renewable procurement might start coming up and kickstarting their processes again.
Yeah, it's certainly a logical process you've taken us through there with what some of that latter group is doing. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens. I think certainly there are plenty of price sensitive organizations out there in the current market that also have sustainability goals. So okay, fantastic. So moving along, Jared, you've done a little bit of work at QIC together with Core Markets and CK, which is fabulous. It'd be great to hear from you what some of your key drivers are, since we're talking about drivers a little bit there, for looking at renewable energy there. And maybe as a landlord, reflecting on some of the drivers like mandatory reporting and whether or not that's becoming an important driver for some of your tenants.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks for having us on the panel today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
From a renewable energy perspective, QIC's we have a key pathway to meeting our net zero in operational carbon emissions by 2028. The Renewable Energy offers us secure price on electricity. There's other commercial elements that we have that make it particularly attractive over grid electricity. Probably the most important one of those is we've just committed to a $3.75 billion sustainability-backed loan. There's been a lot of coverage around that. So the purchase of renewable energy helps us to meet those type of commercial goals and achieve those savings under the terms of that loan. In addition, it helps us to meet our tenants' renewable ambitions, so we can purchase the electricity and make sure that our tenants are probably on net zero pathway similar to what QIC are on, and we can meet those requirements as well. The mandatory reporting requirements are certainly something that's becoming more part of my role at the moment, and we're looking in the background to try and introduce the systems and supports to make sure that we're providing what the tenants require, as well as meeting QIC's net zero ambitions, and from that point of view.
That's great. I think for a lot of the buyers joining today, it's something that's emerging as something that that they will need to be addressing. So I guess it's another push in that sort of sustainability driver space, as it sounds like it is for yourselves with with that. And so what are some of the options you're looking at, and I guess some of the challenges you might have found so far with regarding PPA terms?
Like all corporates, we're trying to understand where our load sits. Are we better off buying from a retailer or wholesale project backed? We have a presence across the eastern seaboard, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. And we need to understand the challenges around the projects, whether they're based in the same state that where our centres are, and where the certificates are retired. So we need to be understanding that. During the last round of our purchase, it was particularly attractive for us to understand the projects that our consumption was linked to and their generation source as well. That resonated through the organisation, and that was well sort of received. When there's a tangible project delivered, we can understand exactly where the project is and how much it's delivering. One of the key points, and CK and I spent long nights trying to hammer out this one out, was the contract flexibility to meet investment mandates, to make sure that we've got the appropriate flexibility in the contract. The term of the agreement is always a key question. Probably the number one question that comes to mind is, in the senior management meetings, they often ask me, say, well, we don't do a fixed interest rate swap for more than 5 years. Why are you asking me for doing an electricity contract for 10 years? But that attitude is changing. We're certainly seeing more investment in a longer term partnership, and the ability that we've got to achieve a shared goal is something that I'm sort of noticing more engagement from the senior teams on that one. Communication is certainly important. Engaging with stakeholders as early as possible to make timely decisions, and then there's allowing time for the tail of the contract, the contract departures negotiation. That does take time. We're out of people's normal day. We need to make sure that we have the right people in the right meetings to sort of give commercial and legal approval as required. And then there's the on-site solar that we already have and its impact on load shape, and making sure that that's correctly reflected in the deal.
That's great. Yeah, certainly a lot to be considering and to be socialising across those senior management teams. So congratulations on your progress so far. I think it's great, and changing attitudes as well is a pretty key achievement to some of those things. So we're really interested to see your progress in this space over the next little while.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks very much, Jared. That's great. And so then moving on to our retailer today, Angela Riley. Angela, I wanted to hear from you, I guess, on what your observations are then. Are you seeing a lot of I guess buyers in a similar sort of stage to Jared and QIC, and your thoughts more broadly on where the market will head in 2025?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. Just sort of preface to say that Smartest Energy, we're active on both the wholesale side. So we're a buyer of PPAs ourselves, a very large buyer of PPAs. We don't own any generation assets in Australia. So, we are using the support, financial support of our parent company to be able to enter into these very long-term PPAs to support new renewable energy projects to get their financing. So we see it from both sides. We then are obviously a renewable energy retailer and looking to support commercial and industrial customers in their transition. So I think, as some of the other panelists have sort of alluded to and the report indicates, whilst there was a lull in sort of activity potentially in 2024 as people reassessed their timing, I'm expecting we will see a return to increased activity this year. Simply because people who have delayed will need to start thinking about entering in and signing those PPAs this year, given the lead time if they're signing with new projects. If you sign in 2025, the very earliest, depending on the technology, that you would expect it to be in commercial operation is likely to be 2027 and 2028. So we're certainly active in the market, and we expect to match that with the requirements of what our customers are looking for as well. And they're looking to meet either their delayed 2025 arrangements or their 2030 targets. I'd also, another observation is that, our traditional retailers or vertical integrated generators and retailers with traditional assets are also working on a similar business model, and largely they're going with contracting long-term in the market. So with the increased supply coming on, there's also an increased demand coming from those traditional integrated retailer generators who aren't replacing their retiring traditional assets, coal-fired power stations, etc. They're not building new plants themselves. They're often contracting in that wholesale PPA space. So they're sort of vacuuming up a fair bit of that additional supply that's coming on, and that's out of necessity as well, and also to service their customers. In terms of what that means in terms of the types of structures, I guess that we're starting to see come out in more and more is it's hard. We're seeing less and less of the solar only PPAs and more of the hybrid type of arrangements, and even existing solar projects will often have an option to add a storage later. So we're very much seeing new PPAs have that optionality to add storage at a later date if it's not already part of the initial project. We're also seeing enough developers in the market now with multiple renewable projects that they've built, and so they're able to offer more structured products rather than the traditional run of plant type PPA offtake. You sign up for a percentage of the output, and the buyer takes that risk, whatever that looks like. We're now seeing more firmed and structured products being offered from those hybrid projects or from those portfolio developers. And I think that's important because, as a buyer, as a retailer, and also as, for large corporates, they're potentially better able to match that output or that structured product with what their demand profile looks like, which means if they're using it not just for their sustainability objectives, but also as a hedging instrument against exposure they may have to the wholesale market, they're more effective if they can get output that more closely matches their demand, and potentially they may be willing to pay a higher price. I know prices, we're talking about price sensitivity and prices already potentially being high, but if it's a better fit and it's less risk, then that can actually make it a more effective instrument for the buyer, and more more effective for the developer if they're getting may get a premium price for that product.
Yes,
it might support their project.
It's understanding. Thanks, Angela. And that's really understanding what's behind that price is really important. I think when you are coming to that stage of comparing prices and going out to tender, not just looking at that high level number. So I guess you've covered it mainly, but also I suppose with regards to sort of impacts of the state and federal government policies like the CIS, and any changes in terms of availability and PPA term. Any observations there?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt the capacity investment scheme has driven additional supply, or is driving additional supply into the market. I'd sort of caution that project availability versus project delivery are still two different things. And I've worked for a project developer and a retailer, so I've seen it from both sides. I think, yes, the capacity investment scheme, I think, is resulting in potentially shorter term PPAs being available, that 5 to 7 year time period, as opposed to needing the 15, 20 years. And that's because the capacity investment scheme offers some sort of tail end or back end revenue certainty, or like an insurance product for the developer. I'll leave Dave to comment more on that, but it means that to get the initial financing period, it depends on the way the project's being funded, but for initial project financing, that 5 to 7 year term and having that PPA means that you can potentially, again, get a balance between the term and the price that you're receiving for that PPA, because traditionally those very long-term PPAs are great, but they come at a, not all businesses can commit to that term. And if you do, then you're building in sort of that risk into the pricing around that. So yes, we're definitely seeing shorter terms of that 5 to 7 because of the capacity investment. But the risk on delivery of that project, I think, remains largely the same, whether it's got a capacity investment scheme or not. There's challenges like grid connection, supply chain issues, availability of skilled resources. They don't disappear. And so they still have to be managed within a PPA offtake. Depending on whether it doesn't matter whether it's got a CIS instrument.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angela. I'll just move straight along. In fact, as you almost introduced David yourself, David, as a developer then, what are the key challenges and opportunities for developers in the current market, and how are you approaching them at Axellio?
Thanks, Jackie. So I think, given the increased complexity of the market today, developers such as ourselves, we face some key challenges around regulatory uncertainty, rising project costs due to escalating construction and labour costs, and tighter financing conditions. So I think in addition to this, shifts in government policy can significantly impact the timelines and feasibility of renewable energy projects. And if we use the upcoming federal election as an example, the promises being made by the coalition illustrate just how quickly things can shift. However, these challenges also present opportunities, and as the market evolves, developers who can navigate this uncertainty will be in a strong position to leverage emerging technologies, form more strategic partnerships, and help drive the energy transition forward. And so at Axellio, being backed by a stable shareholder such as Brookfield, we remain committed to these long-term goals, regardless of the short-term fluctuations. And I think that highlights that committed developers will do what is necessary to get these projects out of the ground. And we will look to work with customers who are seeking a partnership approach to help get these projects across the line. And, I'm echoing a great line that our country manager said last week in one of our team meetings, which was, the external challenges can slow the transition, but they certainly won't stop it.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's what we're seeing, absolutely. And there'll always be external challenges, of course. There's also a lot of experience now amongst service providers, retailers, developers, and the buyers in Australia, I think now, that we can really leverage to address some of those emerging challenges. So are you finding the higher wholesale prices affecting the uptake of direct or wholesale PPAs in the market now?
Yeah, look, probably commenting more from a wholesale perspective, I think, LGC prices have come off a little bit since late last year, which may be contributing to the slower uptake of PPAs in 2025 or so far. But I think it's important to highlight that 2025 was a key milestone for many corporates aiming for net zero goals, and with many corporates making substantial strides towards their decarbonisation ambitions. I firmly believe that the next driver of PPA demand will be driven by corporates who have 2030 ambitions. And I think there'll be a similar, viewpoint that'll be published in the State of the Market report. But in saying that, if you look at the big techs as an example, they simply need the power and show no signs of slowing down, especially, with the inception of AI and the building of new data centers. These have heavy energy requirements. So, I see it as that the ongoing demand for wholesale PPAs is there, and, renewables is undisputedly the cheapest option.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, we'll move on now into the energy storage space because we are running a little bit behind time. I'll come back to you, Angela, then. You've talked a little bit already about what buyers are looking for when it comes to energy storage, but maybe you want to elaborate on that briefly, and then what then also your perspective as a buyer of energy storage. Oh, you're just on mute. It's usually me that does that. There you go.
Sorry about that. No. So I guess we're looking, and buyers are looking at how storage can provide a firmer offtake. That said, there's things to consider like the duration of the storage and the operating envelope, are the technical constraints that might go around that. And I guess the offtake type. So, generally with storage, the common ones are sort of physical offtakes versus virtual offtakes. They have quite different risk profiles and complexity. So, ensuring that we're matching the offtake type with the complexity and the operational capability needed to support each of those structures. And I guess just quickly, moving forward, we're starting to think about also with the generation guarantee of origin certificates coming in, what that means in terms of the source of the generation for the storage, whether it's behind the meter or whatever may, can influence what sort of guarantee of origin certificates you're able to potentially generate from that storage. So yeah, they're the sort of key things that we're looking at as buyers.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you also for spelling out those REGOs and the CIS. I unfortunately did that earlier, so apologies to everyone who new to those terms. Back to CK, what are some of the drivers that you're seeing with regards to the corporates including storage and firming in their PPAs?
Yeah, so in terms of having like energy storage packaged together with an underlying, wind or solar asset, I don't think that's really hit the corporate space yet. More so like we see the battery as an overlay onto an existing PPA. So usually when we do have discussions of, energy storage and firming in PPAs, it's more so people who have wholesale PPAs and are spot exposed and are looking for a product to hedge off their, say evening peak spot exposure periods. That's where we see that kind of discussion happening most often, but it's not like an integrated product yet. Probably we're not quite there yet, as it's quite difficult, as to Angela's alluded to. It's different products, physical or virtual, and different levels of risk that people are comfortable with. So we haven't seen a lot of adopters in the corporate space yet start to ask the question of, PPA is already difficult enough on its own. Can you throw in batteries? How can I now assess, is this good value or not?
And something that we're looking at BRC-A as to how we can assist that process and make those a little bit easier potentially. It's something we'll probably discuss with our MAP coming up, our market advisory panel coming up very shortly. And so I assume then the types of products that you're seeing out there, you're seeing initially just standard PPAs and with battery over the top, as you were saying. Any other sorts of products that you're also seeing?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, we're seeing a lot of, say, large oil and gas, heavy industries, trading houses look into this battery-centric focus on different ways to contract it, whether it's physical toll, virtual toll, capacity swaps or green swaps. So I think that's a very nascent area that is evolving quite quickly and kind of reminiscent of the early days of wholesale PPAs and quite complex, mostly sophisticated players entering to that space. Having something similar where I think there's going to be more contracts struck and then a point of reference for others to have the confidence to also take the plunge into this space, and then having some sort of more accessible battery product that people can enter into and have enough liquidity and certainty around. And then we're going to reach a space of, we know how to, contract out PPAs, we know how to contract batteries, and then you start to look to combine these two. And then how can you then now optimize both of these assets together? So I think we're still a ways off until we're able to really be able to package it together. But that's kind of where, at a high level, where I think things are going to evolve and develop.
It's coming. So keep an eye out for that if you're a buyer. And back to you, David. We've heard mentioned there from both Angela and CK around the physical and virtual storage. Can you just, for those who are not familiar with the terms, explain the difference?
Yeah, no problem. So I guess at a high level, physical storage refers to a scenario where the off-taker has direct control over the storage asset. This means they can fully capture all the associated revenues, including both arbitrage and ancillary services. So with this model, it's very similar to where a developer can build the asset and then give the keys to an off-taker to control it for a contracted period. This structure offers stable returns for the developer, but in saying that, they also do give up some of the potential upside from the predicted returns as they no longer control the asset. And so in contrast, virtual storage allows the developer or seller to maintain control over the asset's dispatch, while the buyer can only nominate or renominate the charging and discharging schedules at fixed intervals. And in this structure, typically the buyer only claims the energy only, and the developer claims all the other revenue streams. And then with this settlement, and in a virtual structure, the settlement typically is done through a CFD or a contract for difference, as we all know. So I think the main thing to note is that virtual contracting offers greater flexibility, as it can involve multiple off-takers for an asset, and it allows for more creative contract structures. So I think both physical and virtual structures do have their merits, but the choice between them depends on the goals, risk tolerance, and the flexibility needs of both the buyer and the seller.
That's great. Yeah, it's something that as a buyer, it may take a little bit of time to get your head around, and in terms of what would suit you best, but certainly the experts are able to give you a little bit of guidance around that. And then David, your perspective on energy storage as a developer, what you're doing at Excelio.
Yeah, so all of our projects moving forward are incorporating co-located battery energy batteries, and we're also developing a raft of standalone projects. And the main ambition around these is obviously to enhance grid stability, optimize energy trading, and help sort of maximize the renewable energy integration. And I think it's no secret that the government's growing emphasis on storage through initiatives such as the CIS, the expansion of the Victorian Big Battery, the construction of the Waratah Big Battery in New South Wales. It demonstrates a clear shift towards firming solutions that can help address the increasing volatility in the NEM. And as coal continues to retire over the forthcoming years, and I think with Australia being so long in energy during the day, mainly due to our high uptake in rooftop solar and increased large solar projects that have come online over the last few years, there's an incredible opportunity for standalone storage projects, retrofitting existing projects with storage, and developing new hybrid solar and storage projects. And I think the renewable energy transition will face continuous hurdles, and storage will play a pivotal role in ensuring a reliable, resilient, and decarbonised energy system, but also will unlock new value streams for developers and investors alike. So we're very, very supportive, and we see it as a core part of the energy transition and a core part of our business now moving forward.
Sounds good, David. Certainly is a really fundamental piece in the energy transition and coming off coal. So thank you, our wonderful panel, but we will now move to questions. So if you have some questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We've got a few questions there already, and I'll hand over to Chris Briggs, because you've actually answered one of the questions first, but I think worth speaking to as well there, Chris.
Yeah, there was a question about whether or not the capacity investment scheme would crowd out PPAs and whether they're complementary. I think what we were doing is repeating, I guess, we've heard some people suggest that crowding out may happen. Obviously, it takes a lot of resources to bid for the capacity investment scheme, and there were some suggestions that maybe they would be a superior alternative or displace corporate PPAs. I think there may be some element of that, but I think more and more what we're seeing is actually they're complementary. As we heard earlier, they enable those who sign or secure themselves a CS tender to then to go out and offer PPAs and on sell capacity at sort of lower tenors. So I think we see all three. It wasn't our view that they're going to crowd out. I think it's the view of probably some others, I think we're more seeing probably scenario 2 and 3 in the presentation that's happening.
Yeah, I think you've been very good there to present some of the views from out there in the market rather than just our own views, and to address some of those and I guess our views on those perspectives. So I think that's really helpful. We thought we might get a question around the upcoming election, and the second question there does address sort of the coalition's energy policy, but I'll hand back to you there, Chris.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to answer that one. It's probably a hard one to answer, but I'll see if any panelists want to bite. If the states might introduce their own scheme, as New South Wales kind of does, if the coalition removes it.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there, Chris, and say no. The coalition hasn't announced a specific energy policy, but Dutton's been pretty vocal to throw his support behind nuclear, and I think the uncertainty which comes with a statement like that, can be a little bit uneasy. But in saying that, it just shows how quickly things can change if something like that is introduced, and what that would mean for the industry is very, very much unknown. So
I guess we're at a fairly critical point in the rollout of the CIS scheme. So yeah, it's a difficult one too. Angela, you might have a
yeah. I was
there.
going to say, Jackie, I think as an industry we're kind of used to uncertainty. So
True.
yeah, I think we just roll with it, and I think there's a fair bit of momentum behind the path to net zero. It might take a few twists and turns, and there might be delays and setbacks, but I think all in all, there's other drivers that are necessitating, apart from doing the right thing and supporting industry and everything, that there's other drivers for needing to have replacement generation in our market before the aging assets retire. So yeah, I think we just deal with that uncertainty when it arrives and adapt as we have.
Yes, adapt and forge ahead. And I know that obviously a lot of corporates will have their own views, as we did at the start of BRC-A. It was really a corporate-led thing before we had government support around renewables. So certainly we expect some of that will remain. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, I think perhaps next question is, given BESS project costs have dropped dramatically in the last few prices, have you seen a cost reduction in PPA BESS pricing? Is there anyone who would like to take that on? No,
that's okay. We can move on. You might want to have a little think about that one. Perhaps we can return to it, Chris.
Yeah, certainly. So there was a question specifically directed at CK and David. Are you aware of pro forma PPA documents being developed for hybrid projects, VRE plus storage, to enable consistency in transaction structures with a view to hybrid PPA aggregation and monetization as the market evolves? Fairly specific question. Do either of you want to bite on that one?
No, I'm not aware of any pro forma documents that are being created, but I think the big techs are definitely leading the way in terms of trying to sign hybrid PPAs moving forward. I think it's probably worth touching base with some of the big law firms who may have a document around that. But I think it's a newly created product, which is now, I think, going to be the way moving forward. So yeah, it's not that I know of, but it's probably worth touching base with some various industry experts who may be able to help.
Okay, right. There's one specifically, Angela.
Did you want to mention the CK?
No, just quickly add on. Yeah, I'm not aware of any pro formas at this stage either. I think in a great price in how to structure something like that. So I think, yeah, not as far as I'm aware that anything as a pro forma has, come across, at least myself.
Yeah, quite early stage. I can see a question specifically for Angela, so I'll spread the love around. Angela, are you seeing a demand for retail renewable contracting post 2030? If so, how are you prescribing the value of green products post 2030?
Okay, good question. First part, we are certainly seeing interest in renewable retail contracts beyond 2030. How do we prescribe value to green? That's becoming clearer as the REGO scheme rules start to come out. That said, there is a value for the green beyond 2030. What that is, I think lots of organisations are still trying to work that out. Sometimes what we're doing is using progressive type pricing mechanisms or market reset mechanisms, or floor and cap type mechanisms to put a band around that price, that green value beyond 2030, so that it can be adjusted once more clarity becomes available. Or if it's linked to a project, then it's basically matching the terms of that renewable energy project. So we're back to backing that with what we're exposed to through our wholesale PPA.
It reminds me, there was a webinar last week, Energetic CRM delivered on that very topic. So I think the recording of that's available out there as well for those who are interested.
Time for one or two more, or we?
Yeah, a couple more.
Couple more, okay. There's one, I guess, picking up on the types of arrangements, saying there's not sufficient PPAs for best projects. There's some tolling arrangements with the gentailers, but most of them are probably going to continue best projects on their own journey. What is your view about future best off-taking arrangements such as virtual tolling, and who do you think will be the off-takers? Anyone want to pick that one?
Sounds like a David question.
Yes, does it look like a David question?
Yeah, I think though, being batteries are obviously now here to stay. Gentailers typically have been the first general contractors of battery assets, but I'm seeing a lot of demand now grow from global corporates. A lot of trading houses are now entering the market as well, seeking battery only projects. And in terms of where the market will end up, no one's to know, but I think the demand pool is there and it is forever evolving. And I believe watch this space over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah.
We'll see some significant progress there.
I'd also add to that, David, that we're starting to see the emergence of very large multinational corporates turning their attention to better matching their renewable energy to their load. So they've got the existing PPAs in place because they were early movers, and now they're trying to bring in that storage and flexibilities to try and move towards their attention towards 24/7 matching. So I think that's the other demand that we're seeing.
Right. There's a question about how do you see PPAs evolving in WA's power market? Any notable differences from the NEM in terms of PPAs? Is anyone active in WA that can answer that question? I'm not seeing anyone jumping forward. So
I think there's a question here. It's probably partially answered already there, but are you seeing more co-located and hybrid projects, or any differences in terms of impact on offtake arrangement? Maybe CK or Angela or David?
Yeah, we have seen some hybrid PPAs, and there is a technical consideration here is if you decide to contract them out separately. Sometimes there are technical considerations as who has right of way in terms of dispatch. So there are kind of two avenues. If it's AC or DC, do you contract them together as a single asset, or if you're looking to contract these separately, that's another avenue of how to contract them out. So there is difference there, and this comes down to how the arrangement is and at what price point can you get two counterparties to agree to, which is quite a time-consuming process in just getting them to agree to just that particular point.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in as we Have one about 30 seconds left on that one. Oh, good. Okay, well, please virtually thank our wonderful panel and join me in applauding their efforts today to predict the unpredictable. And we want to say thank you to our wonderful panel and also to Chris for presenting and my team member there, Bridget, for organising, doing a wonderful job today. I've just popped into the chat there, more details there about our next buyer boot camp. We don't hold them very often, so it is coming up at the end of this month. If you can make it and you're an energy buyer, please do join. It's also virtually free this year, amazingly, because we have support from Energy Code to deliver that in Newcastle. So please come to Newcastle. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a wonderful boot camp, as they always are, and you'll learn a lot from both energy experts as well as other buyers who've purchased before. We've hit time. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Feel free to download the report, as we mentioned, and also the recording of this session if you missed it. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye then.